So today I want to talk about intersectionality in startup land. For context, 6 months ago, I was transitioning from someone who was struggling to get placed at a team at Google for after graduation, that was my plan, to having a startup and finding my co-founders and like getting all that set up. So this was March, right before I was graduating. So I was in that transition. So what I'm going to talk about is like the things I've learned about intersectionality and the way I've changed my thinking around that over the last 6 months. So there's like 3 general buckets. 1, representation and how we think about representation. 2, the creating of spaces. And 3, high standards. So I'll explain more about that. But for representation, a thing that I found, like we found ourselves doing all the time, every conversation that we have about our startup, it's like, oh, like, who are you? What do you do? I'm Estefania, I have a startup, na na na, so what's your role? And I'm like, first, it's like that box of like people like, oh, like you have that look that doesn't look like a person who has a startup. So every conversation starts like that. So like you see people kind of like figuring it out. And then, so that's the first point. The second point where like they have to figure it out is when I say like, oh, like my role, I build a thing with Elizabeth and the guys do everything else. Which is a really like new thing. Like people apparently like don't say that a lot. Like it's kind of like a weird thing to have in a founding team. So it's like that second box. So like at this point, the person is like, just every time I meet a person, they're figuring out like breaking 2 boxes in their head. Like what do I do with her? What do I do with the structure of her team? And then in the conversation, it comes up that my 3 co-founders are Black. So now we're a team of 4 people of color, all female engineers, and we're like, it's just kind of like, okay, what do I do? Like, where do I put these people in my mind? And often, like, instead of being like, we're redefining storytelling, or we're this other social media platform from Stanford, or we are thinking radically about social change through tech, we are a diversity team. So that's the box that after like 6 months of conversations, that's what we are. We're a diversity team. Or a diverse team, which is funny because we're 4 people of color. So we're no more diverse than like 3 white people and an Asian person. Like, so it's kind of funny to like be a diverse team. So kind of thinking about that, the work that it takes to like get to the point where a person sees us as like a diverse team or a diversity team has been interesting because like obviously that conversation now flows. I know exactly what's going on, but it's been 6 months of introducing ourselves. So I think that like most well-intentioned people arrive at you're a diversity team, how can we help you, right? And then the thing that people say, and this is what like where representation like goes into it, is like, oh, you are important because you are showing other people of color that they can be startup founders. And it's like, okay, cool, but also that could be literally any other team of 4 people of color. And like we don't like, that's not helpful for us to be like that. So thinking of the way, and this is not the way I would think like before with like my mentors and my mentees, like we're always saying and thinking representation matters. Like we need to be visual, like we need to be present, we need to like tell people what we're doing and inspire others. But thinking about representation as the only thing that matters can be very detrimental. And thinking of like personally my worth as an engineer as like, oh, people can look at you be an engineer. And the way we talk to our mentees and the way we talk to each other about what's our worth in this space has to go beyond like the way we're representing whoever we are. I also heard someone be like, it's pretty arrogant to accept that and be like, yes, I represent. Because there's so many other people like us, and there's so many other people like us in tech, and there's so many other people, like we're not enough, but we're a lot. So that's just kind of like, I would challenge you to think about the way you think representation matters, and like how it's not the only thing that matters. So yeah, so that's on representation. On creating spaces, we're definitely creating a space for us. Part of the reason why none of us wanted to go to Google is because we're like, that's not a space we want to be in. So we are coming from a place of like, how do we create a space where we can bring our full selves to work, and where we can be ourselves and we can be productive, and we don't have to spend like 50% of our brain just like being there, existing in a space. I don't know if you guys have heard of Charlene Carruthers. She's the director of BYP 100, and she came to Stanford, and one of the things she said is in her social justice work, she thinks about the margins of the margins, and she was like, if we design a world that is just for Black trans women in America, it's a world that is just for everybody. And I was kind of like, whoa, okay, yeah, like that is a very different way to think about social change, because we often think of social change in like one step at a time. So let's make Silicon Valley better for white and Asian women who graduated Stanford. Great. And let's make and thinking about all the people that we're interacting with who are for diversity, but they are men of color who are acting in sexist ways, or white women who are acting in some racist ways, it's kind of a little depressing to see how few spaces are coming from a place of like radical inclusion, and what that actually means. So like an exercise that I would challenge you guys to do is like, there's this hypothetical person, her name is Clara, she's a trans woman of color from El Salvador who moved to Puerto Rico, who got her CS degree there, is underbanked, and has a kid on her own. So Clara is a person that exists. There's a lot of people like her. Most people, like we think of like, oh my God, the intersection on intersection on intersection, but most people have like so many layers of their identity that if we are creating products for her, and if she can be, like what is the relationship between her and our company? Like most times, like when we ask people like, oh, like we'll reimburse you to like fly here and like get like for us to interview you, it's kind of like there's a lot of like ways that's difficult for Clara, and there's a lot of ways that's difficult for a lot of people, and that's just in the interview process, right? So like I would challenge you, like whatever you're doing, and even like I bring up Puerto Rico, like she's an immigrant in Puerto Rico, because like if you have a 787 phone, like you couldn't get on Uber for like the first like year and a half, right? Because it's like, oh, area code not like identified or whatever. So like all of these like little things that make her experience like really hard are actually things we need to be thinking about, just in terms of like design principles, like designing our companies and designing our products. Like hearing Charlene Carruthers like say that, like margins of the margins, like that's where we need to be designing for. So yeah, so representation, designing spaces, and the last one is high standards. So it's one of the things that has also been surprising is like there's people who say that they are like for inclusion and like they want to be the type of people who respects a team like mine, but they fail so often. And it's like, it's been a very interesting position to be in, and like talking to people who are in a position of power, who I'm like, I need to be checking you right now, because I know I'm not the only team of people of color you're gonna encounter, and I know like, so how, like, it's been interesting to like check people, and like the way we're thinking about it is like calling people in instead of calling people out. So saying like, hey, like, I know like your intentions are great, like you wanna be this, but like X thing you said, like when your question is whether or not we can build things, I would say that a safe assumption is that 2 CS grads from Stanford can build things. So like check that. So it's like that kind of balance. So I would say, like for me, also like thinking of like where, like all of our biases that need to be checked all the time, no matter how well-intentioned we are. I think that a very powerful thing is to like tell people like it's okay to check me. Like I told like my 3 black co-founders, I'm like, check me, because like I don't know what I don't know. And also seeing that as like not a favor you're doing, but a favor you're asking. Like I'm asking you to educate me, and being okay, especially if you're in a position of power, like if you're mentoring someone of a different identity than you, or if you're managing someone of a different identity than you, just like, hey, check me, please, because I want to learn. I want to be the person that respects you. So yeah, so those are a few like ways like my mind has been changing about thinking about representation and spaces and high standards. And on the high standards front, like the way I think about it now, it's like you care about diversity if you are willing to not hire the good engineer who's also racist, not if you're willing to hire the good engineer who's also a person of color or like of X identity. So yeah, I hope that's useful for you guys. And I haven't talked a lot about Griot, but the one thing I would say is if you guys are like interested in being like YouTube influencers, but in a space that like doesn't have YouTube comments, you should talk to me, because that's kind of what we're trying to create. And yeah, the other thing is like, yeah, no, that's it. Never mind. Cool. Thank you.